Hi, Claire and James here. Just before we get stuck into this week's episode, we wanted to let you know the exciting news that the Midlife Reset audit is now live. This is a first of its kind personalised diagnostic tool designed for midlifers by midlifers.
In just 3 minutes, the audit will help you pinpoint what's really holding you back from living your healthiest, happiest midlife, and most importantly, provide tailored strategies on how to take back control. Midlife doesn't have to be a time of uncertainty. It can be an era of growth, discovery, and well-being. So to go ahead and take the audit, go to themidlifementors.com/audit.
Something we started to focus on towards the end of last year is the issue of ageism in the workplace. We started to hear more and more anecdotal stories about people being unable to find new roles on the basis of their age, and even spoke to recruitment professionals off the record who told us that clients were filtering applicants by age. Clearly, there's a huge personal cost to ageism, but in today's skill shortage environment, there can also be a great cost to organisations. The job site Total Jobs released research on ageism in 2024 that highlighted some really disturbing trends, with 59% of recruiters admitting to making age-based assumptions and 46% considering candidates over 57 too old.
We wanted to know more, so in this episode we're joined by Professor Sarah Vickerstaff, Professor Emerita of Work and Employment at the University of Kent and a leading expert in this field. She co-authored the Total Jobs research, and she shares with us not only her findings about how age discrimination manifests in the job market, but most importantly, practical steps we can take to create more inclusive, respectful work environments. Whether you're an employer aiming to retain valuable talent or an employee seeking fair treatment, this conversation will shed light on the realities of workplace ageism and offer pathways for positive change. So settle in and get ready for an insightful discussion that might just change how you view your career journey and the role age plays in it. We hope you enjoy it. Hi, I'm James Davis.
And I'm Claire Davis.
We're the Midlife Mentors, here to lift the lid on how to achieve health and happiness.
The balanced, no-nonsense way.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Midlife Mentors podcast with me, James.
And me, Claire. How are you all? We're not quite sure when this very exciting interview is going to be coming out. So we can't really say what we've been up to because we don't know when it's coming out.
But
Probably in a few
sure
weeks.
We'll be well into the swing of 2024 now.
We will be. At the moment, we're going through a very cold spell. I quite like it. As long as it's sunny and cold, I'm fine. It's the grey and the wet weather that I don't like. So we've been stomping around Hampstead Heath, haven't we? And enjoying the cold, crisp weather. So yeah, that's about...
Well, we've just booked some sauna and cold plunge and ice bath in King's Cross. So we'll let you know how that goes.
Yeah, James is very excited, trying to pin me down to doing some cold water plunging and sauna experience in King's Cross.
With dry January, you've got to get that dopamine hit somehow, right?
How is your dry January going already, James? We're only on the 9th of January. How's it going?
3 weeks to go.
This is coming from someone that's nearly 7 months alcohol free. So I'm feeling very smug about that. Anyway, without further ado, let's introduce our wonderful guest for today.
Yeah, we've got an amazing guest today. And this really came out of something we picked up on the end of last year. So the end of 2024, we started talking around the issue of ageism in the workplace a lot more. And we saw some great research came out from Total Jobs. And we're joined today by Professor Sarah Vickerstaff, who's Professor Emerita of Work and Employment at the University of Kent, who actually authored that research. So Sarah, welcome.
Hello, everyone.
Hi.
It's great to have you here. I guess the first obvious question is that research came out and your experience. What's going on? What's the picture out there at the moment?
Well, I think that people are getting more interested in ageism and its impact on the labour market and its impact on people's experience of employment. When I first started doing research in this area about 25 years ago, it was seen as a very eccentric interest. I would go and give papers at conferences to an audience of sort of three people, a friend, someone who'd wandered in by mistake, and someone with a dog. And it would be the dog that would ask the most interesting question. So it really was 25 years ago seen as a very peculiar thing to be interested in. But of course, since then, there's been much more public discussion about an aging population, the impact that has on expenditure on pensions and expenditure on health. But also, we've seen that combined with a change in legislation. So we've got age as part of the characteristics that are specified in law now, along with gender and race, etc. We've seen state pension ages going up, so people are having to work longer if they can't afford to retire. So there's been a lot of policy action in this field, so much more public discussion. And as part of that, I think people have begun to realise, either from a personal perspective or more from bits of research like the Total Jobs work, that ageism in the labour market is an issue and it is a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually wanted to ask a question.
I know what you're going to ask.
That.
Oh. I know what the question I
No, maybe not. Maybe not. You know me well, but I spring things on you to keep you on your toes. Actually, I was going to ask you, what inspired you to look into this in the first place? So when you say like 25 years ago, what was it that inspired Sarah to look into ageism?
That is quite an interesting question. 25 years ago, or just a bit before 25 years ago, I adopted my daughter. So I was on maternity leave. And I was thinking about the research that I would do when I sort of came back off maternity leave. And I had been doing work on Eastern Europe, which I won't go into. But that had reached something of an impasse. So what was happening in work organizations in places like Slovakia and Bulgaria, etc. But that had really reached a point where you needed to go away and come back 10 years later and to see what would eventually happen. So I was thinking, okay, what might I do research on? And I'd always done research on apprenticeship and younger workers, so transitions into work. And I started to read a little bit about transitions out of work at retirement, at the other end of people's age spans. And then the Nuffield Foundation had a program of research it was funding called Transitions After 50. And I looked at that and I was very struck by the fact that a lot of the research they were funding and a lot of the academic work in the field at the time was of two types. Either it was economists sort of modeling variables, age and wealth and things like that. Or it was more social policy people sort of saying, are older people happy? Are they in poverty? Do they have, So but no one was really looking at older workers in employment. Mm-hmm. And I thought that given that that's my bread and butter, what happens to people in paid work, I thought this was very odd because, of course, people retire from an organisation. They don't retire in the abstract. And it seemed to me very unlikely that some of the motoring factors for why people stayed in work or left early, because there was a lot of concern about early retirement at that point, must be to do with what was going on in organisations, must be to do with what employers were doing, how the policies worked out. But nobody was looking at that. It wasn't, economists didn't look at it, and social policy people didn't look at it. So I found my sort of niche. And put in an application, got some funding to do some organisational case studies from that piece of work, and here I am 25 years later, still doing it. But it raises some interesting connections. Some of the pressures and ideas and theories about how young people move into work are similar and relevant to what happens when people move out of work. Traditionally, people look at young people or they look at older people. They don't sort of look at them in a sense together and think about how they link up, or whether some of the pressures you see for young people trying to find work are actually perhaps not so different from pressures that older people experience. So yeah, that's how I come to be here.
I love that. Well, I always like to know personal stories about how, what ignites that passion in someone to go, hang on, that's all. And sometimes it's really obscure and abstract. And that's why I like to know. And 25 years is a long time to keep on that track.
Yeah.
There's got to be passion behind it.
Another way of looking at it, you could say that when I was younger, I was interested in youth transitions, and as I aged, I got more interested in the other kinds of transitions.
It's funny that.
So I think there's a bit of that as well.
Yeah. I'm really keen to dive into kind of some of the research and the trends out there. Before that, something you mentioned there was legislation, and it's interesting that is in place, because what we hear anecdotally from, I guess, because we work with midlifers, we hear a lot of people that kind of let go from their positions and then really struggle to find anything else. And often it's like they're actually sometimes told you're too old, or couched in different terms, you've got too much experience for this role. But we've also spoken to, recruiters, headhunters, and they're like saying informally, their clients, either corporations, are going, oh, no, we don't want anyone over this age, or these people are too old, or we're using AI to sift CVs, and age is one of the things we're sifting for. But how does that fit with the legislation?
Well, of course, that's illegal. I mean, they shouldn't be sifting applications on the basis of age. And I think it's quite interesting that what you're saying and what the Total Jobs research showed, that recruiters were willing to admit that age was a criteria, that 46% of recruiters admitted that age was a factor in considering people too old. I think it's interesting that people are willing to admit that in a survey, because I think ageism is still a rather acceptable ism, if I can put it like that. Yeah, I don't think if I went out, or Total Jobs went out and did a survey of HR managers and recruiters and sort of said, oh, do you recruit on the basis of race? 48% wouldn't say, oh yeah, of course we, I mean, they might. I'm not saying they don't.
Very doubtful though, isn't it?
But they certainly wouldn't be willing to say that publicly. And I don't think they'd be willing to say it about gender either. And they might not be willing to say it about disability. But somehow it's still okay to say it about age. So I think although it shows many features similar to sexism or racism or ableism, there are some very specific things about it. It's an acceptable face of discrimination, if you like, and I think you see that in things like birthday cards. If you go onto one of the digital online birthday card suppliers, it will take you 30 seconds, I guarantee, at most 45 seconds, to find a whole slew of really ageist birthday cards.
Yes.
Yeah.
And people will be given these in the workplace. Oh, here you are, Fred. Here you are, Frida. And it's a card sort of saying, joining the old farts club or something like that.
Yeah. It's true. I hadn't actually thought.
I hadn't thought of that.
But I don't think people would give people racist birthday cards in the workplace anymore. I mean, they just wouldn't.
No,
even if they were that way inclined, they wouldn't do it.
Yeah, so it would be unthinkable, actually.
It would be unthinkable, yes. I think it would be.
And then the policy would slam down on them like a house of cards. I mean, absolutely, it's unthinkable. Whereas what you're saying there, this is what we really wanted you to come on. We're so grateful for you coming on and talking about this, because it is a real issue, and it does get me quite irate, because we do hear a lot of people saying this in our environment, whether it's clients or even friends, and they, like James said, they've been let go, they're finding it really hard to find another job, they're too experienced.
I think what we have to remember here, of course, is that ageism can work in both directions. It's not just ageism against older people. There's plenty of ageism in the labour market and in work organisations against younger people. So the total jobs research showed that older people, up to a third of old people, were not applying for jobs because they thought, well, they won't want me because they'll think I'm too old. Right? But a not dissimilar number of younger people were also not applying for jobs because they assumed they would be seen as too young. So, age discrimination can work in all directions. I think it's more dramatic for older workers because we know that once someone over 50 is unemployed and not re-employed fairly quickly, they're much more likely to spend an extended period unemployed and maybe not even get back into the labour market at all. Whereas younger people, obviously circumstances are enormous. So you can't talk about younger people any more than you can talk about older people as if they're all the same, because they're obviously not. But statistically, younger people are less likely to remain out of work for longer. They will find a job. And they will get into the labour market unless they're living in a very, very depressed area where the labour market is very stagnant, or they have other kinds of problems which are inhibiting their ability to work. I think we have to remember that about ageism. But I think that the too old, too qualified is sort of lazy thinking. It's not thinking about what you actually need for this job. And this is where a lot of ageism revolves around stereotypes. And stereotypes can be positive or negative. So you can have very positive stereotypes about older workers. Very reliable would be one. Very steady, got a lot of experience, reliable, all of those kind of warm, soft, comfy kinds of attributes. But of course, they're not tech savvy. They don't like change. They're a bit rigid. All of those, they're not so good at a fast-paced changing environment, all of that. So that sort of harder stuff, as it's sometimes seen. No, older people don't have that. And of course, it's the flip side for younger people. They're unreliable, they don't stick around, they're not very motivated, they don't know how to behave properly, but they're good in a fast-paced environment and they're tech savvy and et cetera, et cetera. So what's happening in both instances there is people are being very lazy. And of course, that's how stereotypes work. That we look at someone and we make instant judgments about who they are, what they are, where they've come from, what they're likely to be like. And that's a kind of quick way of going about things. But what it is not thinking, okay, what is this job? What are the attributes that we need for this? What are the competences that we need? Let's think about those. Let's list those. And then let's find people that match those competences. And those people might be any age, any race, any gender, whatever. But of course, we know we live in a corporate world that's fast-paced, where people don't have time always, and it's easier to do what you've always done. It's easier now with AI to run all your applications through that. That saves time, and not to re-examine what the AI is. We know with things like face recognition, don't we, that face recognition technology is really bad at recognizing, people who aren't white, ethnic minorities of all sorts, because it's not been built on their faces. It's been built. It's not so good on women either, but it's been built on a particular set of people. So again, if you're using, AI to filter, and you put in a whole load of words like, used to change, dynamic, or whatever, that will start indirectly screening out older candidates. It saved you time, but of course what it's also probably done is lost you some of the best candidates that you might have looked at.
Yeah, and I think about the whole I don't really know how it works, but obviously I'm thinking that if you say that you started just before we got on this call, we're talking about when James was at Kent University back in the 90s. If you say when you first started your job, obviously if AI is looking at when you did your first job and it sees 1997, well then that's, even if you don't put your age on it, there it is.
yeah, exactly. And if you put your qualifications down, because qualifications change over time, pre-degree qualifications.
Yes.
So, I'll talk about O levels and A levels, and people will look at me like, what's she talking about? So, yeah, and if you're filtering on those kinds of bases, someone doesn't even get past the first step. They're out of the pile at the get-go, just on the basis of when their first job was. So, yeah.
So from the research you've done and all the research you did with the total jobs things, was anything that really surprising that came out of you, and what were the trends that you saw there?
Well, I think there's beginning to be a bit more of a recognition that this is a problem, not just for older job seekers, but it's also a massive problem for employers, because at the same time as we've got these discriminatory things going on, we've got organisations screaming about skill shortages.
Yes.
Of all sorts. And we've also got organisations trying to recruit more diverse workforces, especially in some customer-facing roles where they want to match the customer with the people who are going to be facing them. Someone who's perhaps not so sure about which computer they want to buy as they go into whatever the store is faced with a 25-year-olds who at least on the face of it appear to be incredibly tech savvy. They may feel very much sort of, oh, these people aren't really going to be able to help me, rightly or wrongly. I mean, probably they are able to help, but there's that. So some customer facing roles, organizations are beginning to realize that on the phone, for call centers or in shops or in hospitality or whatever, that people respond more effectively to a diverse workforce. And that might not just be age, but it might be all sorts of other characteristics like gender and races as well. So I think there's sort of it's not fast enough and it's not widespread enough, but there's a bit of a recognition by employers that they're missing some tricks here, that they're screaming about shortages. And then there's a whole pool of people out there with loads of experience, loads of talent, loads of motivation, who they're not even managing to sort of get to the first stages of recruitment and selection processes for whatever reason, or that their customer service and other things are being impacted by not having a diverse enough workforce.
Are your organisations, what are you seeing that organisations are starting to do about that realisation? Are they starting to do anything, or is it just playing lip service at the moment?
Well, there'll be a lot of lip service because there always is.
Yeah, exactly.
But I think you can find, I mean, BT was the example that was used in the Total Jobs report.
Yes.
And they recognised this customer focus role in terms of their call centres.
Okay.
That they actually needed to have a more diverse bunch of people at the end of a phone. Typically, call centre jobs have been seen as younger people. Now, a lot of organisations have recognised that regional accents in call centres are a beneficial thing. That actually, a sort of standard Southern voice might not be attractive to someone phoning in from Glasgow or wherever. There's been a bit of a recognition there about, having different kinds of voices at the other end of a telephone. So BT just recognised that they wanted a different call centre workforce in terms of its diversity. So they just started to look in different places, reframe their adverts, go out and try and recruit older workers. Think about where those older workers would be. Think about what would attract them to a job. Flexibility, for example, because call centre work tends to be quite flexible in terms of how many shifts you do and what times of the day that you're happy to work. So to think through where the older job seekers would be and what would attract them. So I think that's quite a good model for what organisations can do. I think also it's very clear to me when I go around and talk to employers that they don't monitor their workforces in terms of age. So whereas they probably do monitor them in terms of gender for sure, because they have to do gender pay gap reporting, and they may do in terms of ethnicity, but they probably don't in terms of age. So a first question I will often ask is, what's the age profile of your workforce? And I'm sure we have that somewhere. Some poor soul from HR is dragged in to sort of say, no, sorry, we don't. We could get that data, but we haven't got it. And of course, they do have it because they'll have all kinds of data on their workforce which will include age, so they will literally have it, but they've never looked at it, they've never collated it, they've never thought about it. If they then try and tell me that, yes, they include age in their equalities activities and that, yes, they're definitely looking at age, I say, well, how can you know what problems you might have if you're not monitoring the workforce by age profiles? Because if you don't know that this particular area of the business is heavily concentrated with people at the ages of 25 to 45, if you don't know that, you haven't got the figures to show you that, then you don't know it's a problem. How can you be targeting it? So, I mean, data is always the first point. And a good example of this, I worked with a train company a few years back, and train drivers who are in short supply, and they take quite a bit of time to train. So there's certainly a workforce that train companies want to retain. Because it's a safety critical environment, they're driving our trains, so you want to know that your driver's fully up to speed, capable. They collect lots of data on their drivers, looking at response times, looking at anything that happens. So they've got all that data. Now, because they've got all that data, they can look at it through an age lens and sort of say, well, are older drivers more prone to accidents or more prone to events? There's not very many accidents on the railways, but there are events which are kind of pre-accident issues in a sense. And because they've got that data, they can run through it. And what they said to us was, you get great drivers who are 35, 45, 55, 65. You get not very good drivers who are 25, 35, 45, 55. Age didn't predict how good a driver somebody was.
Yay, that's good to know, isn't it?
Good. So, but
they still got our faculties.
they wouldn't have known that without the data.
Yeah.
They had the data, so they could run that check, and they admitted, they sort of said, well, we were probably surprised, if we're honest. We probably assumed that the older drivers might not be as good as the younger ones, but actually that was just not the case.
Can I just ask a question, Sarah? When you go into these organisations and you ask them what their data is, and you have a HR woman or man or running off and trying to find the data for this woman called Sarah who's come in and disrupted everything, do you find that when they realise that there's a gap there with regards to looking at age, how open are they really at your suggestions for being more age inclusive?
Well, I think, there's two ways in which I think organisations, or maybe three ways, that you will get a bit of a change. One is compliance. So if they've had someone pop up to take an age discrimination case against them, then no business wants to be in the national news or online or in local news as having discriminated against Sarah, 66, who worked with the organisation for 35 years, being, unceremoniously ditched.
Yes.
And then popping up and claiming age discrimination. They don't want that kind of publicity. That's very unfriendly. It doesn't look good. They don't want it. So, there may be a compliance element to change, that actually there have been some rumblings. People have taken cases. They've maybe been settled, before they get to a tribunal or whatever, but it's raised a bit of an alarm. There is discrimination legislation out there. Are we complying with it? What do we need to do? So that's one reason. A second reason will be these, if you like, more commercial things. We can't recruit train drivers, to use that example again. Well, they want more women train drivers, so they've had to start thinking about shifts and how they do that. They could start recruiting 45 plus, as a target group for train drivers. If there's, I don't know, I haven't been in there for a while. There may not be a shortage now. I suspect there still is. Because boys don't grow up wanting to be train drivers anymore, so it doesn't have the same appeal that it used to have.
Jane still wants to be one. There we are. There's
your career path.
There's your job.
I'm always recommending it. I have to say, I'm always recommending it to young women because it is well paid. But so then it's sort of, okay, we've got a massive skills shortage. They've got good pensions, train drivers, if they've been in industry for a while. So they can leave, quite quickly. And then they're timely. It takes a long time to replace them because you've got to get someone in, train them up, etc. So there could be a sort of skill shortage push.
Right.
Now, actually, we're just not getting people for these jobs. Where might we find them? Well, we might find them in the older population. Or there might be that commercial push in terms of the product. We're designing this product. Are we designing it in a way that will be ultimately appealing to an older consumer? Or are we designing it? It's rather like the white goods employers years ago realised that having women as part of the design teams for washing machines and all kinds of things made sense, because they were the consumers that used them the most. So
not in this house.
Oh, I knew he was going to say that, Sarah. Not in this house.
Well, we've moved on.
I think I found the washing machine once. Yeah, it's that white thing in the kitchen.
We've moved on. I mean, that was 30 odd years ago. But, so there may be good commercial reasons why you sort of think, actually, and the research shows that diverse teams produce better outcomes. Now, that might be a product, it might be a service, it could be any sort of thing. But a more diverse team brings more perspectives, more skills, more interests in, produces something better. So there may be that commercial push. The third thing that I thought of when I said there's two, and then I thought there was maybe a third, is like a lot of other equality strands, is if you get a champion, if you get a senior person who's had a light bulb moment about this issue. And you see this now, especially with issues around menopause.
Yes, I was going to say
10 years ago, like, who the hell talked about menopause in the work context? Almost nobody. Now it's very live. It's which is great that it's being discussed. And in a lot of instances, that has been someone coming into a more senior position and having, a personal sort of connection to the issue, either because they have menopausal themselves, if they're female, or because they've got, a sister or a spouse or someone else that they work with that they can see is struggling with menopause symptoms. And they just kind of take hold of it and think, I'm just going to push on this one. So a champion, either as a motivating force, or once you've started to think about it, appoint a champion, get someone in that role. And that applies for absolutely everyone, all discrimination issues. If you've got someone who is like the proverbial dog with a bone and is not going to let it go, is just going to keep popping up and sort of saying, well, what are we doing about age? How's age affecting our recruitment? Well, do we have a culture that's sympathetic to age? Do we know what the age profile of our workforce is? Someone that just keeps popping up and raising the question and shining a light on it.
I think it's so big. And I was going to ask, like that feels like quite a challenge at the moment. How can we influence leadership in corporates, basically step forward and be champions for this, like you're saying?
Well, I think you do come in on the sort of commercial basis, because that's what people will listen to in the first instance. You can appeal to their better natures as well and say this is, discrimination law requires you not to do this. But I think you want to combine that with a business case argument. I don't think a business case is enough in itself, because I do think people have to take moral responsibility for the decisions that they make in a corporate setting. And if they're discriminatory, then, that's illegal and it's also morally reprehensible. So you don't want to let people off examining their own behaviour and whether it's good or not. But I do think a business case which sort of says, well, are you having any issues recruiting people? Are you having issues retaining people? There's not too many organisations that will pop up and say, oh, no, we don't have any of those problems, especially not at the moment. Are you entirely happy with, your customer-facing staff, or are you entirely happy with your design teams or your project teams? Are they fulfilling all of their objectives? There's not many organisations that will just go, oh, yeah, we're doing everything perfectly well and we have no HR problems of any sort at all. So I think that is your routine. Have you thought about recruiting slightly different kinds of people? Have you thought about how you recruit and whether that's attracting some people and repelling others, even, people not even applying to you? And one I've used quite a lot is, I can't tell you the figures off the top of my head, but if you look at retention, because after all, really, most organisations should want to hang on to their employees because it's costly and time consuming to go out there and replace people who leave, either through retirement or because, for some other reason they go off. You want to retain them. How are you treating people? Do you know whether they want to stay? Do you know what are the things that are likely to make them stay? Do you know what the stats are on retention? I mean, if you employ someone at the age of 47, 50, they're much more likely to be with you for 10 years than if you employ someone who's 21.
Yes.
And that's not to decry or say anything against the 21-year-old who is still finding their way, building a career. And there is this whole idea that you have to move around, which I don't necessarily think is true, but it's certainly a belief that you have to move around to build up your career at a younger age. So if you're looking to recruit some people who are going to be solidly with you for the next 10 years, people over 50 are a much better bet.
That's a great point. It's a great point, actually.
I wanted to ask something about the retention, actually, or the retention and letting go, because I think a fallacy in a lot of corporations, in economically tough times, they're like, okay, cost cutting, senior staff are more expensive, so we can save more money by cutting them. But is that a fallacy? Does it end up like, do they lose productivity? Is it costing the company more in the long run?
Yeah, it will obviously depend, won't it? So it depends how expensive the senior people are and whether you can simply substitute much cheaper alternatives. Now, typically you can't. The reason that people have quite a good salary towards the end of their careers, and remember, that is a very particular subset. I mean, that's sort of managers and professionals that are on that sort of ever-increasing salary sort of thing. I mean, most people actually earnings peak sort of late 40s, 50s, and then tend to decline a bit, because they get less overtime or they're working slightly different shifts. So not everyone is just on that kind of ever rising salary trajectory. Sorry, that's a digression, but we tend to always imagine everyone's sort of.
No, you're right though.
And they're not.
There's a real assumption. I make that assumption, so I'm really glad you've highlighted that. It's made me think in a different way.
But for those who are, then if they go, you get a cheaper person. Take a school, for example, would be a classic example. Schools are so hard pressed in terms of their budget, and more senior teachers have been around for longer. They've accrued increments because of the pay systems and the way that they work, and they do cost you more. So I've been a school governor in various schools. There's a tremendous pressure. Well, we can get a cheap early career person in. Well, of course, they do not replicate all the things that your senior experienced teacher was doing. They take more managing because they're coming in they're in an earlier stage. They need to be properly mentored and supervised and developed to enable them to eventually become that experienced person. They probably can't do the range of extracurricular things that most experienced teachers do these days, not just whatever they're there to teach, but all kinds of other stuff. Yeah. So, you're younger, but your headline knock off the budget, what you've saved off your bottom line. We've saved 15k a year or whatever, more than that with on costs. But have you replaced the skills and experience that you've lost? Well, probably not. So then what happens? Well, you might need some more teaching assistants, because now actually you're not covering that. You now haven't got anyone who's doing the singing lessons, because they used to do that as an extra thing. So now you've got to find someone to do that. So you can end up almost in exactly the same place, to fill all the things that the experienced person was doing. So there's always that calculation. And of course, the costs of recruiting someone and the gaps in the meanwhile. So if it takes you a period of time to find that new person, you might have been paying extortionate sort of rates to have, supply teachers in to cover the classes while you're sorting out et cetera, et cetera. So, very budget-driven decisions like that, of course, can make tremendous sense. I mean, I'm a trustee in a charity, and we're always worrying about our budget, and you're looking for nice chunks of money that you can save. But you need to think beyond that and sort of think, okay, we might save that, but what would it cost us? What would we not do then? Because we no longer have that experience. And what's the cost of not having that experience and doing those things that they were doing?
Yeah. Oh, Sarah, this has been fascinating. I could talk.
I know. I'm just exactly. We always like to keep these around 30 to 40 minutes, but we've had so much to talk about. And genuinely, we had so many more questions that we wanted to ask Sarah. Maybe we'll ask Sarah back at some point if you'd be willing to come back.
Yeah, for sure. Well, as you can see, I can talk for.
It's really fascinating stuff, and it's really important what we're talking about here. It's something that we feel really passionate about. We can see that you feel passionate about it as well, and obviously it's something that affects our listeners, because we're that midlife age. So
but what I would say to those midlife job seekers, and I mean, of course, we haven't talked about people who are trapped. You talked about people who can't find the next job when they're a certain age. There's a lot of people, I think, who are trapped in their current jobs because they think, who else will give me a job? If I'm out there in the labour market now, they know what the labour market is like, and they know the things that they're faced. So they're trapped. Now, that's not good for anybody either, is it? It's not good for the individual who's lost motivation and feels like they're marking time a bit. Not good for whoever's employing them either. So what I would say to those people and to job seekers is, don't rule yourself out. If you see kind of language in an advert like dynamic or fast-paced or tech, whatever, don't be put off by that. Don't read that and think, oh, they don't want me. Put your best foot forward. focus on your experience and your competencies, what you can do, not what you can't do, and put in an application. And then press them a bit, ask for feedback. Why weren't you shortlisted? Can they give you, because we sometimes are a bit too humble, I think.
Mm-hmm.
No, and no one likes rejection. So sometimes it's easier to sort of think, well, maybe I won't even have a go at that because probably I wouldn't be successful. But I would say go for it. And if you're confronted with a recruitment team who are all 25 and you're 50, and you think, well, this lot's not going to want to recruit me, push a little bit, and sort of say, oh, it's interesting to sort of see it's a very young team in recruitment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because you may not be getting the job anyway, but you might be able to deliver a message.
Yeah. I know. I think that's really important and really uplifting and a really positive way to look at it, because we do become more risk averse as we age as well, don't we? We think, oh, like you said, I don't want to be rejected. I don't want to. Yeah.
Well, we've experienced more of it, haven't we? So
exactly.
that's it. So, but as we know, you can bounce back invariably.
Oh, 100%.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sarah. It's been fascinating. I know the listeners are going to
love this.
As always, if you've got questions on this, anything's come up, then feel free to drop us an email, team@themidlifementors.com. And yeah, thank you, Sarah.
Thank you
so
very
much.
If
You're welcome.
To find out a little bit more about you, do you have anywhere where people can find out a little bit more about some of the research you do? Or...
there is if you go to the University of Kent and search for my name, you'll come across probably rather boring lists of publications, which won't be of interest. But there will be a website on ageism and gendered ageism. And there's a couple of animations that we did about ageism and its impact on there, which actually you can find them on YouTube. You don't even need to go to the University of Kent. You could find, if you go to YouTube and type in ageism and disableism, you'd probably find them, or type my name in and you'd find me rattling on as I have this afternoon.
Oh, no, it's amazing. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that people could find out a little bit more about you, and I might find those and put them in the show notes myself.
Well, they're absolutely, they're on YouTube, so they're free for anyone to find and use.
Brilliant.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sarah.
Thank you, so inspiring.
Yeah. You've been listening to the Midlife Mentors with Claire and James Davis.
We'd love to hear from you. So drop us a line at info@themidlifementors.com with any questions or topic suggestions.
And make sure you join us on our Facebook page and YouTube channel. You can find us under the Midlife Mentors. Yeah. What? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode, and don't forget to take the Midlife Reset Audit now to receive personalised insights into what's holding you back from living your healthiest, happiest midlife. So go ahead and take the audit now at themidlifementors.com/audit.